What's going on? Just wanted to do a little video with you all to review for your Unit 1 test, okay? Which you'll be taking towards the end of this week. So the way I'm going to do this is I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 8 slides that are going to cover, some of it's review, meaning stuff we already went over. Some of it's actually new material, either important names or concepts that I didn't get a chance to hit earlier in the unit. I want to go ahead and share with you now, okay? So anything that is bold and underlined, I want to make sure that you write that stuff down. The way I create this PowerPoint is I went through the 70-question test, and for every question, for every right answer, I made sure that either I'd gone over the material or that I included it in this PowerPoint, okay? So if you watch these 4 videos, the 3 with content and then this video, you should be good for our test, okay? So psychology, where does it come from? We talked about how Wundt was the first psychologist, but the actual field, the discipline of psychology, it's a combination of both philosophy, right, thinking about why things are the way they are, as well as what we call physiology, which is a fancy way of saying studying the physical, studying the body. It's the same thing as biology, basically. So we talked about Darwin and all these terms that are related to his idea of evolutionary success, which is like a functionalist idea, William James. And then for the history of psychology, here are some important landmarks, some important folks. So we've talked a couple times about the APA, the American Psychological Association, that is in charge of the ethics of any experimentation. So the guy who created that, the first president of the APA, his name was G. Stanley Hall. The way I remember that is sometimes I think to myself, he was the OG, right? G. Stanley Hall, original gangster, the OG of the APA. Sometimes I think, for some reason, for me, when I see the last name Hall, I picture like a Hall of Fame, right? And I picture this like building that's like this long hallway, and it's got like pictures and portraits of all the famous psychologists on the side, and that helps me remember, oh, he was the first one. He started this organization that all these famous psychologists have been a part of. So, second one, Miss Calkins and Miss Washburn. These are 2 famous females in the world of psychology. I want to actually start down here with Miss Washburn. And there's a reason why. There's a mnemonic I like to use, okay? She was the first woman to get her PhD, to get her doctorate degree in psychology. She's the first female doctor of psychology. For me, when I see the name Washburn, who do you have to go see? If you have a burn, well, you go see a doctor. Washburn was the first PhD, the first woman to get her doctorate. So Miss Calkins, I've not come up with a great mnemonic for Miss Calkins. Maybe there's something in here about call, perhaps. I don't know. Or Mary. I don't know. But she was the first female president of the APA. So G. Stanley Hall was the first president of the APA. She was the first female president of the APA. So those are 2 important names for you. And then down here, one more famous female in the world of psychology, Ms. Dorothy Dix, who you may have studied in U.S. history, or maybe this year you'll learn about her in U.S. history if you're a junior now. She was a reformer in the world of psychology because she said that we need to have better ways of taking care of people who have mental illness. So back in the day, if someone had a mental illness, they would be institutionalized. They would be put into a mental asylum, locked up basically. And she said that we need to stop having these terrible mental asylums. So she led what's called de-institutionalization, stopping these terrible institutions from existing and harming people who could be helped and who could be cared for. Okay. This is a little bit of the history of psychology. Some more history of psychology. This is just kind of a review of guys that we have gone over. So Wundt was the father of psychology. He was a structuralist. James was the functionalist. Wertheimer was Gestalt theory. Freud studied psychoanalysis. And there's a little summary here of all these key terms. The unconscious, the childhood, id, ego, superego. Carl Rogers was a humanist along with Abraham Maslow. Rogers said that we need to love each other, unconditional positive regard. He also developed what's called client-centered therapy, the idea that we need to take care of the patients and help them meet their potential. And Maslow developed that hierarchy of needs as well. Okay, so this is mostly a review, but these will all be names that will be on that test. So the approaches of psychology, most of these are pretty common sense. Cognition has to do with thinking. Development is about aging your entire life from birth to death. It used to just be about when you were a kid, but now they're saying, no, we're developing throughout our entire life. This name is a new one. His name is Jean Piaget. Everyone say Piaget. Okay, he was Swiss. We'll talk more about him in our unit on developmental psych, but he studied how the way people think over time, how it changes. Cognitive development, Piaget. And so right in the middle of his name, you have the word age, right? He said that as you age, as you get older, the way you think changes. So Piaget, as you age, you think differently. This is a type of psychology that I don't think we mentioned. It's called industrial organizational psychology. So industry is a fancy way of saying a company, a workplace, a business. So if you are an I and O psychologist, that's how this usually gets abbreviated, you study the workplace. You study how to be a more efficient, productive worker, or how bosses and managers can help lead their company, okay? And that should be pretty self-explanatory. The word industry is literally in the name of that branch of psychology. The biological branch is all about the body. Counseling psychologists help people with problems of normal living. Psychometrics, so here might be a new term, to measure something. That's what metrics means. So on our very first day, we took the Big Five. We took a personality test, right? That is a form of psychometrics, studying the mind. That's another branch of psychology. The eclectic biopsychosocial that was on our quiz, it's just a mix of different fields of psychology. And so I'm going to go into a little more detail on behaviorism, which is an emphasis on what you can see, what you can observe. So this is all about learning, how humans and animals and organisms change over time. They can be conditioned. And this is sort of something that's really unique in the world of psychology. The behaviorists didn't care at all about your internal processes, the way Freud cared about the unconscious, or the way the cognitive psychologists care about what's going on inside of your mind. All they cared about was what was observable. Another way of saying that is that they thought that learning and psychology should only be about the physical or the mechanical, meaning like the parts of the body and the things that everybody could see. This was John B. Watson, who did the little Albert experiment, which we'll talk about these guys in our whole unit about learning. So the whole unit about behaviorism. We'll come back to Watson and Pavlov and Skinner, but as you need to know for now, they are behaviorists. Okay. When psychologists do research, there's a little summary here. Hopefully you can see it all about correlational research. Surveys allow for quick collection of data. Case studies examine a unique individual in depth and detail. Naturalistic observation is all about your natural habitat, just seeing what people or animals do on their own. You would use a scatter plot, and where every single person would get a dot, and that would allow us to form a correlation coefficient to measure how strong the relationship is between -1 and 1. A correlation coefficient close to 0 means there's not really a relationship between these variables. And just remember, of course, that correlational studies do not determine causation. This is new material, if you will. Put a star by this. There's two ways of doing research. Longitudinal studies, it has the word long in it, take place over a long period of time. That's what this has to do with, time. So like you get a group of 5-year-olds and you study them when they're 5 and 15 and 25 and 35 and 45 and 55 and 65 and 75. Long period of time, long study to see what happens to them as they get older. That's a really hard way to do research. If I'm 30 when I'm starting my research, I can't really wait 70 years to get the results. It would not go well. So another way of doing research besides longitudinal is to get people from across many different ages all at once. That's called a cross-sectional study. And the way that would work is I do my experiment on one day and I bring in 5-year-olds and 15 and 25 and 35 and 45, 55 and 65 and 75-year-olds all at once. I can collect all my data in a single day to see if there are differences across age groups. Now, longitudinal studies are better. It's the exact same subjects the whole time who generationally have experienced the same things in technology and world events, right? Between 5-year-olds and 75-year-olds, our experiment might say that 75-year-olds are really bad at video games. It might not be because 75-year-olds are actually really bad at video games. It might be because when they were growing up, there weren't video games. And they missed out this critical period. So the best type of research is longitudinal, but sometimes we have to do cross-sectional, which is a little quicker, okay? When we're talking about experiments, a random sample comes first, who's in your study. That allows us to take our results and generalize them to the broader population, right? We want to have a random sample that represents the larger group of people that we're trying to make assumptions about. Once we have the people in our study, the subjects in the study selection, this will start with S. Subjects in the study is selection. Subjects in the study is selection. We then have to assign people to either the control group or the experimental group, the placebo or the medication. They either get nothing or they get something, okay? That's called random assignment. And that helps us eliminate bias and really determine causation. Okay. Other things about research, we talked about the 2 different types of statistics. Make sure you know the different types of variables, independent, dependent, confounding variables, and then operational definitions. Some of us talked about how Gwinnett County is operationally defining a close COVID contact as being within 6 feet of someone for at least 15 minutes. That's the operational definition, how they are measuring close contact. I was listening to a podcast this week about the NBA and the NBA bubble in Florida where they're having players play in the playoffs. Their definition of close contact is if you get within 6 feet of someone for 10 seconds. They're making everyone wear a little wristband, and that wristband starts to beep and buzz if you've been interacting with someone for 10 seconds. 2 different definitions of operational definitions of variables, the exact same variable, close contact regarding COVID, but completely different definitions will lead to completely different research. So you have to make it very clear how you are defining whatever it is, sleep, grades, a close contact with someone. That way other folks in the future can do the exact same study. Here's that big word, replicability. That's what we're looking for in a good experimental design. That it can be replicated so that other people can do the same research and get similar results. Statistics, you know about the measures of central tendency, mean, median, and mode. Variation and standard deviation, how spread out things are. Skew, meaning what graphs look like. There's one other form of skew that I did not mention in our last video. It's called a bimodal skew. So we talked about how a normal distribution will look like a bell curve like this. And then you have your right skewed graph with outliers to the right. You have your left skewed graph with outliers to the left. A bimodal skew, bi meaning 2, modal, 2 modes, 2 heights, 2 humps, right? So a bimodal graph would look kind of like this, okay? So there would be 2 different spots. And this is pretty unusual to get in the natural world, but sometimes it can happen in school settings or with some health outcomes where there are 2 different groups. You're either doing really well or really bad, and no one's really in between. Okay, that's bimodal skew. Ethics, we talked about CCDDPP, some terms for you here. We talked about the APA and how there are federal guidelines. We also have, for animal ethics, institutional animal care and use committees, which are in charge usually at colleges and universities of making sure that any animal research is being done appropriately. Local institutional review boards, like Gwinnett County might have a local board that deals with experiments being done in Gwinnett, or the University of Georgia might have a local board. They're called IRBs. They make sure that the folks who work for them or who are within their jurisdiction are following the right ethical guidelines when they're doing psychological research. Okay, so this is just a little review for you of some things that we hadn't hit, some new stuff to kind of wrap up the unit, as well as just like the key points of the things that we have gone over. Just make sure that you're familiar with these concepts. The Unit 1 guide is posted on eClass. Highly recommend going through that. All the PowerPoints, the class recordings, and then of course those 4 videos. I'll send out links to some Quizlet, and we'll do some review Wednesday and Thursday as well. Okay? Y'all got this. Woo!